By the time Luca DeSantis warned me not to smile at another man again, I already knew two things about him. The first was that he never raised his voice when he was most dangerous. Men louder than him filled rooms all over Brooklyn. They bragged, threatened, laughed too hard, slammed glasses down like noise could make them feared. Luca only looked at people. Sometimes that was worse. Sometimes it made the whole room feel as if it had been nailed shut. The second was that he watched me when he thought I could not feel it. Not my mouth, not my body, me. The pauses, the lies I told when I was tired. The way I flexed my fingers after pulling bread from the oven because the heat stayed in my bones. The way I pretended not to notice when his hand hovered at the small of my back without touching. Men like Luca did not fall in love gently. They circled it, denied it, bled around it. And when it finally found them, it came out sounding nothing like tenderness. It came out sounding like a warning whispered against my ear while another man made the mistake of making me laugh. And somehow, that was when I knew I was already lost. At 4 a.m, the restaurant belonged to the men who never appeared on the books. I knew that before I knew Luca's name. Lynette looked harmless in daylight. White tablecloths, narrow-necked olive oil bottles, a wall of wine no one ordered unless they wanted to impress somebody. But before dawn, with the chairs still upside down on the tables and the rain needling the front windows, the place belonged to a colder kind of order. Men in dark coats stood too still. A voice in the dining room stopped mid-sentence and did not start again. The silence after it was worse than a shout. I let myself in through the alley door, with a sack of oranges bumping my hip and flour already on my wrists from the prep I had done at home. I had been at La Notte for 3 weeks. Long enough to know which shelf in the dry storage leaned to the left. Not long enough to know why the owner suddenly stopped coming in after midnight, or why the waiters lowered their voices when they mentioned the family, like they were talking about God or cancer. The kitchen lights were on. That should have warned me. I tied on my apron anyway. Bread dough did not care whether men were lying or bleeding in the next room. Butter still needed to be cut cold. Yeast still had to bloom. The first wedding cake of the week still had to be leveled, filled, and stacked before 7. I washed my hands, reached for my bowl, and only then noticed the smear of blood on the stainless steel prep counter near the sink. Not a little smear. A handprint. I stared at it for exactly 1 breath. Then the kitchen door opened. 3 men came in first. Suits, hard eyes, one had a split lip. Another held his jacket closed with one hand, as if something under it had gone wrong. Between them walked a man who moved so quietly that the room seemed to adjust itself around him. He was taller than the others. Dark hair, no umbrella despite the rain, black coat open over a charcoal suit. There was blood across his knuckles, not fresh enough to drip, fresh enough to matter. He looked at the room once, and I understood without understanding that this was the person everyone else had been arranged around. Not the loudest man, the stillest. He did not speak to me first. His eyes moved over the racks, the mixer, the back door, the high window fogged by heat. Then they stopped on me. I had a paring knife in one hand and an orange in the other. One of the other men said, "Boss, we should clear her out." I remember that word because it sounded ridiculous in my kitchen. Boss, like a costume, like theater. I put the orange down. "If you drip on my floor," I said, looking at the blood on the counter instead of at him, "you clean it." Silence. Real silence this time, not the kind that came from fear. The kind that came from surprise. I heard a short, strangled sound behind the tall man. It might have been someone trying not to laugh. It died immediately. I still had a cake to build. So I turned, pulled a clean-side towel from the oven handle, and held it out in his direction without ceremony. "The sink's there," I said. "And don't touch the fondant." When he took the towel from my hand, his fingers brushed my flour-dusted skin. Warm, rough, there and gone. I looked up then, finally. His face was worse than I expected. Not uglier, more controlled. A straight nose that might have been broken once. Mouth set without strain. Eyes so dark they almost looked empty until they fixed on you, and then they felt full of things he never said aloud. A faint pale line cut through one eyebrow. There was no swagger in him. No performance. Men like him did not need one. "You talk to everyone like this?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Lo, nothing wasted. I went back to my bowl because that felt safer than standing still under that stare. Only men who bleed on pastry stations. That strangled sound happened again somewhere behind him. The tall man dried his hands. "What's your name?" "Clara," he watched me knead. "Clara what?" "Morty." A beat passed. Then "Farina." I stopped. "What?" He looked at the flour, ghosting my fingers. "You smell like it." The word landed coolly between us. Not cruel, not kind, an observation pretending not to be possession. Before I could decide whether to be offended, the door from the dining room banged open hard enough to hit the stopper. A waiter stumbled in. I knew him. Nino. 20, maybe 21. Too thin for how much he ate on staff meal nights. He had flirted with every woman in the building and blushed when any of us flirted back. Now his shirt was red at the side and his face had gone the gray color of wet paper. He saw the dark-haired man and froze. Then his eyes found me. Something wild moved through them. He crossed the kitchen in 2 staggering steps, grabbed the front of my apron, and shoved something small and cold into the pocket at my waist. "Don't," he coughed. Blood touched his mouth. "Don't let them." One of the suited men caught him before he hit the floor. Everything after that happened fast, faster than fear. The tall man took 1 step toward me. "What did he give you?" "I don't know." That was true. My hand had already gone to the pocket, fingers curling around a metal edge. Round, heavy, a coin, a token. Nino made a choking sound on the tiles. His eyes rolled once toward me, then stopped moving. I had never seen a person die before. The kitchen seemed to narrow. The man with the blood on his knuckles, Luca, though I did not know his name yet, held out his hand. "Give it to me." "Why?" The nearest suited man swore under his breath. Another moved toward me. The dark-haired one lifted 2 fingers and they stopped. "Because of him, not because of me." "Because," he said, "if Nino put it in your pocket in front of my enemies, then you are in danger now whether you understand that or not." I took the object out slowly. A brass token. Stamped with a winged saint on one side. On the other, a number, 17. Rain ticked at the window above the sink. The mixer hummed where I had forgotten to switch it off. Flour lay soft and white beside the blood on the steel. He looked at the token, and something shuddered behind his face. Not surprise, recognition. "Boss," the man by the door said quietly, "they'll know she has it." His gaze came back to mine. It did not soften. "No," he said, "they'll know she touched it." He turned to the man behind him. "Lock the restaurant down." Then to me, "You're not going home, Farina." The back door shut. The key turned, and then the door locked from the outside. I learned the shape of captivity in small indignities first. Not chains, not threats. Better coffee than I could afford, placed in front of me without asking how I took it. A chair pulled into the office upstairs, while men walked in and out as if I were furniture they had decided to protect. A woman from the front of house bringing me a cardigan because my hands would not stop shaking after dawn, then refusing to meet my eyes when I tried to thank her. No one explained enough. They explained around things. By 8, the rain had stopped and my entire normal life had already become an inconvenience to men I had never met. I was supposed to deliver 2 cakes to a wedding planner in Tribeca. Call my produce guy. Meet Rosa, my father's cousin, my nearest thing to family, for lunch at the bakery supply store in Queens. Instead, I sat in an office above La Notte while voices rose and fell behind a half-closed door, listening to the silence of armed men pretending to be still. Around 10, the dark-haired man came in alone. He had washed the blood off, changed his shirt, not his expression. He shut the door and leaned one shoulder against it as if he had never needed to hurry anywhere in his life. "You can use your phone," he said. "You cannot leave." It should have felt generous. It felt like weather being announced. I folded my arms. "Do I get your name with the hostage policy?" His eyes flicked to my hands, then back to my face. "Luca." The name did something in the room. Or maybe it did something in me because of how everyone else said it, like they had to fit themselves around it. Luca what? DeSantis. I knew that name, not from headlines. Men like him were rarely in the paper for what they actually were. I knew it from old whispers in Brooklyn kitchens, from owners lowering their voices when suppliers changed suddenly. From my father, years ago, snapping the radio off one night and saying some families did not need politicians because they had neighborhoods. My mouth went dry. Yes. No apology. No pride either. I laughed once because fear sometimes came out wrong in me. That's not very specific. Something almost moved at the corner of his mouth, but it didn't stay long enough to become amusement. I wanted to hate how calm he was. I mostly hated that it made me calmer too. Nino gave you a coat check token, he said, from a club my family owned 15 years ago. It should not exist in circulation now, and it means he wanted to point me somewhere before he died. Why use me? He didn't trust the men in the room. That sat between us a moment. Should I have trusted them? I asked. No. His honesty was so immediate it felt like a slap. The office door opened before I could answer. A broad man with a shaved head, expensive shoes, and the face of someone permanently offended by salad stuck his head in. Boss, if this rabbit food hell continues, I will die before your enemies kill me. Luca didn't look away from me. Then I'll save money on flowers. The big man came fully inside, carrying a paper container and a bottle of something green. He stared at me, I stared back. He sighed like the universe had burdened him personally. So this is the flower girl. Farina, Luca said. The big man pointed a plastic fork at him. See. This is why nobody thinks you're romantic. Then he looked at me and offered the container. Tommaso Bellini. Everyone with affection calls me Maso. Everyone without affection still calls me when their car won't start or a body needs moving. Celery stick, I blinked. No, good, more for my suffering. He dropped into a chair. My daughter checks my blood pressure app every night. 8 years old and already a tyrant. So now I eat unsalted chicken and pretend life is worth living. I did laugh then, couldn't help it. Masso's expression brightened with vindication. See, she understands tragedy. Luca pinched the bridge of his nose once. Why are you here? To tell you the car is ready. Also to beg God to strike down every nutritionist in the tri-state area. When he left, muttering about sodium like it had personally betrayed him, the room felt strangely less sharp. Luca noticed. Of course he did. That was deliberate, he said. What was? He came in because you were frightened. I hated that he was right enough to see it. I'm not frightened. His gaze held mine. That was worse than being called a liar. I looked away first, out the window. Down to the street, where delivery trucks hissed by and ordinary people crossed intersections without being told where they could stand. My father used to do that, I said before I meant to. Do what? Look at people until they admitted things. Luca stayed quiet. It made me keep talking. He thought silence was strength. After my mother died, he turned into a locked room and called it surviving. I rubbed flour from my wrist that was no longer there. Everyone said he was strong. I always thought he was just alone in a way that made him difficult to reach. When I looked back, something in Luca's face had gone still in a newer, harder way. I had the oddest feeling I had stepped too close to something unseen. He straightened from the door. Come on. Where? You said you had deliveries. I frowned. I thought I couldn't leave. You can't leave alone. The car downstairs was black, spotless, and so absurdly expensive that I was afraid to breathe on the seats. Maso drove, still complaining that someone had hidden potato chips in the glove compartment as a test of character. Luca sat beside me in the back, one hand loose on his knee. No touching. No crowding, just presence. We made the deliveries with 2 other cars behind us. At the second stop, while I signed paperwork with a hand that barely shook, the wedding planner, a handsome man in a navy coat who always called everybody Bella, smiled and said, Clara. If you ever get tired of working for ghosts, I have a cousin in Soho who would worship your hands. I opened my mouth to say something light, something normal. Luca answered from behind me, She doesn't. The planner's smile vanished like a candle pinched out. I turned. Luca didn't raise his voice, didn't step closer. He only looked at the man once and the whole air changed. Not loud, unmistakable. When we got back in the car, he did not explain himself. He only shut the door with one clean click and said, Until this ends, you go nowhere without my men. By the 3rd day, I understood that Luca's world was built less on fear than on choreography. Cars arrived before they were called. Men changed places in doorways with a glance. Restaurants, construction sites, warehouses, a flower wholesaler in the Bronx, 2 clubs in Manhattan. A shipping office near the river. Everything seemed separate until you watched how often the same faces passed through. Territory did not have to be marked when it was already obeyed. I saw only the edges at first. La Notte, a butcher shop in Carroll Gardens that never ran out of cash. A private room at a cigar bar where no one ever interrupted Luca. A church in Bensonhurst where old women kissed his cheek and young men lowered their eyes. He moved through it all without showing off. He was greeted, deferred to, watched. Even his enemies seemed to organize themselves around his gravity. The danger of it was not drama, it was efficiency. I kept baking because baking was a language that still made sense. At La Notte, I stacked cannoli shells, laminated dough, brushed egg wash across braided loaves. The smell of flour on my hands grounded me when the rest of the room felt borrowed. But even there, the strange logic of Luca's world kept threading itself through mine. Invoices arrived with the wrong wine vintages listed. A produce bill included 3 crates of pears no one in the kitchen had ever seen. Nino's locker had been emptied, but someone had forgotten the carbon copies under the false bottom of the pastry flour shelf. I found them because I was angry. Anger made me clean. Rage made me organize. I was on a ladder in dry storage, pulling everything down to scrub the shelves, when Luca found me with a stack of invoices on my thigh and a pencil in my mouth. "What are you doing?" I took the pencil out. "Your accountant is either stupid or laundering through dessert." His brows shifted. Barely, enough that I knew I had his attention. I held up a page. "This says we ordered 20 cases of Barolo on a Tuesday. We don't have the rack space, and Tuesdays are half the bottle count of Fridays. Also, the invoice code repeats every 4th week." He came closer, took the paper from my fingers, and looked at it. His coat brushed the ladder once, and I had to lock my knees so I would not react like the contact mattered. "It repeats," I said, trying for steadiness and missing by a little. "Because somebody is using the orders to bury another payment schedule. You know books. My father ran a bakery until he couldn't." I climbed down, took the paper back, and pointed to the dates. I did his ordering from 16 on. Flour, sugar, fruit, labor. There are only so many ways people lie with numbers. They either make things too big, too neat, or too often. His gaze stayed on me longer than the invoices. What else? I should have been flattered by how seriously he asked it. Instead, I was annoyed by how much I wanted to keep being useful. "The token," I said. 17, that's not random. "No, Nino wanted you to see a place?" "Yes, you know where." A pause. "Club Orphe," he said at last. "Old coat check system, closed years ago." "Then why hasn't this fast mystery of yours ended?" The corner of his mouth changed, not enough to be a smile. "You think in chapters? I think in exhaustion." He took the invoices from me and set them aside. "Orphe burned after my father died." "Burned accidentally?" "No," I waited. He did not continue. That was the trouble with Luca. Every answer came with a locked door built into it. Later that afternoon, I was frosting a 3-tier lemon cake when Maso wandered into the kitchen, holding a container of plain yogurt like it was a medical sentence. "I miss cheese," he announced to no one and everyone. "I miss cured meat, I miss flavor." My daughter said if I keep eating like this I'll be alive for her graduation, which is apparently more important than joy. "You could always ignore her," I said. He pressed a hand to his chest. "And break the heart of a child? Clara, I am a criminal, not a monster." A laugh slipped out of me before I could stop it. Maso leaned on the counter and eyed the cake. "If you happen to accidentally drop one tiny spoonful of mascarpone into my mouth, I would consider it community service." "Touch it, and I break your fingers," Luca said from the doorway. Maso glanced skyward. "You see what I endure?" The room warmed by a degree because of him. That was his gift, I realized. Not humor exactly, permission. A way to remember these men had mothers, daughters, arguments about cholesterol and parking and bad knees. It made the darker parts worse in one way, more human in another. That evening, I boxed the lemon cake and noticed a thin sheet of fondant I had rolled too far, stretched too carefully. It cracked when I lifted it, spiderwebbing down the center. I stared at it longer than the ruined sugar deserved. Too much pressure. Too little give, beautiful right until the moment it split. I threw it out and rolled another. On the drive home, a motorcycle appeared at our left side, so fast I only had time to register the rider's black visor before Luca's hand hit my shoulder and shoved me down. Glass burst above us. Maso swore, jerking the wheel. The rear car accelerated. Another shot. Then another. The sound inside the armored car was smaller than I expected, flat and brutal, like doors slamming in another room. Luca's body covered mine without hesitation, one arm braced across my back, his cologne sharp over something colder underneath. "Stay down," he said. I could not see his face. Only his jaw. Only his hand. Only the blood beads sliding from one scraped knuckle onto the black leather seat. When the noise stopped, it stopped all at once. Maso exhaled like a man finishing an argument with God. "Good news, I didn't die. Bad news, I really want a sandwich." Luca lifted himself first and looked out the broken side glass. "They found her route," he said, "not us, her." Then he turned to me, eyes dark and completely awake now. "Fast enough for you, Farina?" Club Orphe stood on a dead block in Red Hook like a memory no one had buried properly. The facade was blackened from the old fire, though somebody had covered the worst of it with corrugated metal and boarded windows. Rainwater had stained the stone near the entrance. A brass sign, half torn off, still showed the curve of a lyre. I should not have been there. That thought had lost its force by then. 2 days earlier, I had been deciding whether to switch to a cheaper vanilla supplier. Now I was wearing sensible boots in an abandoned nightclub at midnight, because a dying waiter had put a token in my pocket, and a mafia boss had decided my life belonged inside his perimeter. Luca stood beside me as one of his men cut the chain on the side door. "Tell me the truth," I said quietly. "Am I bait?" He did not answer at once. The lock snapped. Finally he said, "If I wanted bait, I'd tell you." For some reason that made me trust him more. Inside, Orphe smelled like damp velvet and old smoke. Our flashlights skimmed over a collapsed bar, a cracked mural of dancing women, booths slit open years ago. The silence had weight. Dust shifted under our shoes. Somewhere water dripped in a slow, hollow rhythm. Maso came in behind us wearing a bulletproof vest he clearly found insulting. "If I faint," he whispered, "tell my daughter I died honorable and sodium-free." "Shut up," Luca said. "I'm serious. Bury me with prosciutto so I go to heaven happy." Even in the dark, even with guns drawn, I almost smiled. The coat check room was smaller than I expected. Rusted hooks. Numbered brass tags scattered in a drawer. Luca took the token from his pocket, held it next to the row marked 17, and then crouched near the base of the old counter. "Not at the hook, at the floor." "There," I said before anyone else saw it. A scratch in the concrete, too straight to be random. His flashlight cut across my hand, then back to the mark. "How? Because everything else in here decayed naturally," I pointed. "That didn't." He looked up at me once, something unreadable in his face, then nodded to one of his men. The concrete panel lifted after 10 ugly minutes with a crowbar. Inside was a waterproof courier pouch. Everyone went still. Luca opened it himself. No money, papers, ledger pages, shipment schedules. Names buried in wine orders, meat deliveries, repair invoices. Accounts that fed through La Notte and 2 other restaurants into shell companies I had never heard of. Payments to Vescari men. Payoffs to cops, and one column marked only with initials. "RV, who is that?" I asked. No one answered. That was answer enough. The fast mystery closed with a sick little click in my head. Nino had been moving information through the restaurant. He had found something in these accounts, known he would die for it, and given Luca the key before he could be searched. The men who shot at us had not wanted a woman named Clara Morty. They had wanted the last person seen holding a path to proof. I looked at Luca. "So now what?" Instead of answering, he turned another page. A photograph slid loose from the back of the pouch, charred at one corner. Old. A little girl in a white church dress standing on stone steps with a dark-haired teenage boy beside her. He had one arm around her shoulders and a face too serious for his age. Luca went motionless. The room changed. No speech, no performance, just absence where breath should have been. "Boss," one of the men said softly. Luca handed the photo to him without looking, as if touching it too long would do damage. "Keep the ledgers," he said. "I had no right to ask. I asked anyway." "Who was she?" His eyes found mine slowly. There was something in them now I had not seen before. Not softness, something more dangerous. Old pain brought close enough to smell. My sister. Before I could say anything, the first shot came through the boarded window. Wood exploded inward. Luca moved so fast I felt stupid for ever thinking of him as still. 1 second he was standing across the room, the next his hand was at the back of my neck, driving me down behind the coat check counter as bullets thudded into plaster. My shoulder hit concrete. He landed partly over me, one arm braced, the other already drawing his gun. The closeness was not cleanly chosen by either of us. That made it worse. His breath struck my temple once. Warm. Controlled. His coat trapped the cold out. I could feel the length of him, the terrifying steadiness of him, the violence held in place by muscle and decision. Then he lifted just enough to fire twice through the broken board. Men shouted. Glass fell. I turned my face and found a splinter buried in his cheekbone, bright with blood. "You're hit. It's nothing. That's still your face." For the first time in the chaos, he looked at me like the words had caught him off guard. Then his thumb, rough and abrupt, brushed the cut on my palm where I must have scraped it going down. A tenderness inside violence. Small enough to miss if you did not know what cruelty felt like. The shooting ended as abruptly as it began. One attacker dead, the others gone. Maso appeared over the counter, breathing hard. Good news, I remain tragically alive. Bad news, I definitely pulled something expensive. Luca stood and hauled me up with him. His hand lingered at my waist 1 second too long before leaving. The ledgers were bagged. The photograph disappeared into Luca's inner coat pocket. As we moved out, I looked back once at the cracked little room and the empty slot where 17 had hidden all those years. The fast mystery had closed. The slower one opened wider immediately after. Because if these papers named Luca's enemies and the photograph named his grief, then the initials buried among both mattered more than numbers. RV. Whoever that was, they were not outside the story. They were inside the house. Secrets did not always feel like lies while you were carrying them. Sometimes they felt like unpaid bills. Like inherited embarrassment. Like something too shabby to take out into expensive rooms. I lasted one more day before mine split open. It happened in the pastry kitchen, because of course it did. My hands were working faster than my thoughts, whipping egg whites too long, folding in almond flour too sharply. Turning macarons delicate, enough to crack from a stair into something brittle and hollow. Row after row of pretty pink shells rose and collapsed inward at the center. I should have thrown them out sooner. Instead, I kept arranging the ruined ones on trays like discipline could fix structure after the damage was done. "You murder those often?" Luca asked. I jumped and nearly dropped the piping bag. He stood in the doorway, jacket off, tie loosened, as if men had spent the morning trying to kill him, and he had come here afterward because this was where the quiet was. "Only when I'm annoyed. With me, with everything." His eyes passed over the ruined trays. "That includes me." I set the bag down harder than necessary. "You want honesty?" "Yes." "No, you don't. Try me." The room smelled like toasted almonds and sugar burned just past the right point. Flour dust floated in the shaft of late sun by the high window. I reached under the recipe box at my station and pulled out the folded page I had kept hidden there for years. Not the whole ledger, just one torn sheet. His gaze dropped to it, then came back to my face. "I found it in my father's things after he died," I said. "A page of coded payments tucked inside an invoice book from his bakery." He never told me what it meant. I kept it because I thought maybe one day I'd understand why he went to prison for tax fraud that didn't make sense. Luca didn't move. "My father did books for people in this world," I said. The words tasted like old shame. Not the glamorous version. He baked, he delivered, he wrote numbers where he was told. Then one year the audits came, and suddenly he was the only man left holding anything. He wouldn't say who he protected. He just kept saying some debts get inherited before they get paid. His jaw shifted once. "I thought if I could decode the page," I said, quieter now, "I could clear his name in my own head. If nowhere else, You had this the entire time. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? Because I did not want to be a girl from a compromised family in front of a man who measured weakness like weight. Because I was tired of my life shrinking every time another man's sins touched it. Because something in me had wanted one thing that was mine before his world named it. Instead, I said, because men like you hear old debt and think ownership. His face emptied. I regretted it instantly, not because it wasn't fair, because it landed. He stepped closer, and my body made that humiliating, silent decision to stay where it was. Men like me, he said softly, keep you alive when old debt turns current. I wanted to answer, couldn't. He took the page from my hand. His fingers brushed mine and stayed there just a heartbeat longer than necessary, as if both of us had forgotten to move first. Then footsteps sounded in the corridor, and the moment broke. Renato Visconti came in carrying espresso. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, beautifully dressed, with the kind of grave warmth that made older women trust him and younger men stand straighter. I had met him twice. Both times he had spoken to me kindly, like I was a daughter of someone he once respected. Clara, he said, offering a cup, you look tired. Thank you. Luca did not take the second cup Renato held out. The older man's eyes shifted between us, mild and unreadable. This is a hard world to stand near. You don't have to prove anything to survive it. The words should have comforted me. They did, a little, which was exactly why the moment felt wrong. Luca watched Renato with an expression too flat to read. Only his left hand gave him away, the one not visible to Renato. His thumb rubbed once over the torn paper edge in a slow, thoughtful drag. A suspicion, then, not certainty, but enough that the air changed. The listener would have known then what I did not, that the comfort was poison-lined. That Luca had started seeing the shape of a trap long before I understood whose shadow I stood in. Renato smiled at me. Your father was a decent man. My throat tightened. You knew him, for a long time. Luca's gaze snapped to his, small movement, big consequence. Renato set the untouched espresso down. Get some rest, both of you. War makes tired people careless. After he left, the room stayed quiet for a full 10 seconds. Did you know, I asked, that he knew your father? Luca's voice was neutral. Yes, no, something moved under my ribs, not fear, not yet, a premonition wearing plain clothes. I turned back to the ruined macarons. I hate that I'm useful to this. You're more than useful. The words hit me low and strange. I looked at him. He seemed to realize what he had said only after it was already between us. He took one step closer anyway. His hand rose as if to touch my face. Stopped. Dropped. That was the third time he had stopped himself since I met him. I noticed because my body kept noticing everything about him that I refused to name. Clara, he said. No one had ever made my name sound like he was testing whether it belonged in his mouth. What? A long pause. Then he said the wrong thing. From now on, nothing in your room stays locked from me. Anger rose fast enough to save me from whatever else had almost happened. You don't get to decide that. I already did. I shoved the ruined tray away so hard 3 shells cracked. He looked at the mess, then at me. Something almost tender crossed his face and vanished. I know, he said quietly, betrayal had not been proven. But somewhere inside Luca's house, it had started to breathe. The assassination attempt came wrapped in white roses. I was delivering a wedding cake to a reception hall in Staten Island, because the world, apparently, had decided that armed men and buttercream should now share a schedule. 2 of Luca's cars came with us. Maso drove mine, muttering that love was a scam invented by florists and sodium. You hate weddings this much? I asked from the passenger seat. I hate banquet chicken, he said, and I hate seeing 6 kinds of pastry I'm not allowed to eat. Last week I dreamed I eloped with a wheel of Parmigiano. From the back seat, Luca said, you should tell that to a priest. I did, he laughed. It was almost ordinary. That was why it worked. The loading dock looked empty. Too empty. I saw it 1 second after Luca did. He was already opening the door when the florist van at the curb exploded inward and men came out shooting. Maso swore, ramming the car into reverse. Luca was outside before I could breathe twice. The world narrowed to noise, gunfire, tires screaming, somebody shouting in Sicilian. the brutal slam of bullets into metal. The wedding cake slid in its box behind us, collapsing with a soft, absurd sound that should not have mattered and somehow did. A man yanked my door open from the passenger side. I hit him with the metal cake stand before I thought to be afraid. He grunted, reached again, and then Luca was there. I had seen violence before that day. I had not seen Luca without restraint. It was not rage in the theatrical sense, not yelling, not wildness without direction. It was focus so complete it looked feral. He broke the man's wrist, turned, fired twice at another attacker, dragged me out of the line of sight, then put himself between me and everything else that could move. Blood striped his sleeve. Not all of it was his. His face had gone remote in the way storms go remote right before they hit land. "Down," he said. I obeyed, not because of fear. Because his hand at the back of my neck said more than language could. Moss appeared from nowhere with a pistol in one hand and a sad little bag of unsalted almonds in the other. "If I die holding these," he barked, "I haunt every one of you." I laughed once in spite of myself, the sound cracked and wrong in all that gunfire. Moss looked scandalized and weirdly proud. The attack ended when the last shooter dropped and the hall's front windows finished raining glass. Then there was only breath. Sirens in the distance. The cold marble of the service corridor beneath my palms where Luca had pushed me to safety. He knelt in front of me. His thumb lifted my chin, checked my face, my throat, my shoulders. "Where are you hurt?" "I'm not. Don't lie to me. You're bleeding. I asked you first." There was blood along his side, a graze, maybe deeper. I reached for him before I thought better of it. My fingers found the torn edge of his shirt, the hard heat of his body beneath. He went utterly still, not because he did not want the touch, because he did. Luca, his POV broke over the moment like a blade pulled partway free. It was the towel first. That stupid clean towel in the kitchen, while blood dried on my hands and men waited for me to decide who would live. She did not tremble, did not flatter, did not ask permission to keep being herself. She only told me not to ruin her floor and handed me something ordinary, as if I were still a man built for ordinary things. No one in my world had done that in years, maybe ever. And now her fingers were inside my torn shirt, checking whether I was alive, and I knew with a clarity that felt like damage that I would burn cities before I let them take her. He leaned forward like the force of that thought had weight. I thought he was going to kiss me. So did he. His mouth stopped a breath from mine. The almost of it shook more than impact would have. He closed his eyes once, opened them, rested his forehead lightly against mine instead. "Farina," he said, and for the first time it sounded less like a claim than a confession. I did not know what to do with the way my whole body answered that, so I said the wrong thing. "You scare me." He drew back as if struck. I saw it happen, the wall go up, the face return. Then I kept going because I was terrified of what I actually meant. "You scare me," I whispered, "because I'm not afraid enough." Something changed in him again. Slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal, he lifted one hand and touched my cheek with the back of his fingers. That was our first intimacy. Not explicit, not clean, not safe from interruption. But intimate in the way truth is when it slips out before either person wants it. Then Masso limped into the corridor, clutching his side dramatically. "I would like the record to show," he said, "that I got shot protecting two people who still haven't kissed." Luca didn't look away from me. "You got grazed." "A graze is still an insult," Masso snapped. "Also, somebody stepped on my almonds." That broke the moment enough for breath to return. A phone rang. One of Luca's men answered, then crossed the corridor with a face I already hated. "Boss," he said, "two of our warehouses are on fire. Port Richmond too." Luca stood. War had stopped circling and arrived. He offered me his hand. This time, when I took it, he didn't let go quickly. War changed the city by changing the people inside it. Delivery routes shifted. Men who used to nod at one another across fish counters stopped making eye contact. 2 restaurants closed for renovations and reopened with different staff. A florist in Bensonhurst got questioned because the wrong cousin took the wrong money. Sirens seemed to follow us from borough to borough. Every ordinary thing developed an edge. I learned to sleep with shoes on. I learned the weight of a door that locked from outside and the precise tone armed men used when pretending not to be worried. I learned where Luca kept spare magazines in the Mercedes and which of his left side ribs still hurt when he thought no one was looking. And I learned what his world cost other people. Chef Matteo died on a Thursday. He was 58, mean about overcooked pasta, kind about everything else. He had worked at La not longer than anyone in the kitchen. He brought me blood oranges in winter because he said the color made pastry prettier. When the bomb meant for Luca's supply truck detonated behind the restaurant instead, Matteo shoved one of the dishwashers to the ground and took the worst of the blast himself. He never woke up. There are losses too large to feel immediately. They pass through the body like weather through broken glass. You hear them before you understand they are yours. At the funeral, Luca stood 3 rows back and did not speak to anyone unless they spoke first. Old women cried. Young men looked murderous. Matteo's sister slapped one of the catering boys for trying to carry a tray at the wrong moment. Life, rude and ongoing, kept entering the grief. When it was over, Luca put an envelope in Matteo's sister's hand. She tried to refuse. He closed her fingers around it and moved away before gratitude could form. No speech, no witness. That was how he loved people, like shame had taught him to do it in secret. That night, he put a passport and a set of keys on the table in front of me. We were in the apartment above La Not that had become mine without ever being offered. "What's this?" I asked. "A way out." I looked up. "There's a place in Montreal," he said. "Own through 6 names that don't touch me. You can leave tonight. New papers, cash, work if you want it, quiet if you don't." The room seemed to tilt. "You want me gone? I want you alive. That's not the same thing. It is to me." His voice was so even I almost missed the fracture under it. I picked up the passport, my photograph, another name. The exit was real. He was not trapping me. That would have been easier to fight. "I leave," I said carefully, "and what happens here?" His jaw moved once. "What has to?" Meaning blood, meaning fire. Meaning the part of him I had seen in glimpses would have full use of itself. "My Aunt Rosa is here. She'll be protected. By your men?" "Yes," I laughed without humor. Everything comes back to that. He stepped closer, not touching, never assuming. "You are not responsible for staying just because others can't leave." "Neither are you," I said. "I know," but he didn't move toward the passport either. That was the truest thing in the room. I thought of Matteo, of Nino, of the exploding florist van. Of the way my life had shrunk and sharpened around this man until every future I could imagine had his shadow in it, whether I liked that fact or not. Then I thought of Montreal. A clean kitchen. Strange cold. No Rosa, no Matteo's grave, no answer to what happened to my father, no Luca. The last one landed hardest. That angered me enough to be useful. "I had a lease ready," I said suddenly. He frowned. "What?" "My own place, before this. Tiny storefront in Carroll Gardens. Rosa was going to lend me half the deposit if I handled the ovens myself. I was going to name it after my mother." Something crossed his face. Regret, maybe, that he had not known there was a world in me not arranged around him. "I can still make that happen," he said. "That's not the point." "What is?" The truth came out plain. "The point is, if I leave now, I spend the rest of my life wondering whether I ran from danger or from you." Silence. He understood the cost of that better than anyone. I set the passport back on the table. "I'm staying." His expression did not change quickly enough. For one unguarded second, relief showed nakedly. Then the control came back. "You should hate this choice." "I probably will." "Clara, no," I shook my head. "Don't make it noble. I know what your world is now. I know what it's already taken." "I'm staying anyway." Because I was no longer afraid of him in the simple way. I was afraid of myself around him, of how easily my life bent toward his gravity, of how little of that felt like an accident anymore. His hand lifted, hovered near my jaw, stopped. 4th time. We both noticed. Finally he said, "Then from here on you stay by my side." Not a command exactly, not a plea, a cost named out loud. I swallowed. "That sounds dangerous." "It is." Outside, somewhere in the alley, a bottle broke. Inside, the flower smell from my hands, faint now, after a day of funerals and smoke, rose between us like memory. I did not take the passport. I took his war instead. Renato Visconti took me with kindness first. That was how I understood it was him. Rosa had called from Queens, saying the old proofing oven at the tiny storefront I wanted, the one I had not stopped thinking about, could be mine cheap if I came that afternoon. Luca was in Manhattan handling, something nobody explained to me. Moss was downstairs arguing with a pharmacist about heart-healthy snacks designed by terrorists. Renato arrived in a sedan with one driver and an expression of grandfatherly patience. "Luca asked me to take you," he said. "That should have been enough to stop me. It almost was." Then he added, he thought if he called, you'd say no out of stubbornness. Which was true enough to feel earned. By the time I realized we were not going toward Queens, the doors had already locked. I did not scream, it would have wasted air. I looked at Renato instead, really looked. The immaculate suit, the folded hands, the face that wore civility like skin. "You knew my father," I said. "Yes, and you knew Nino would die." His smile faded, not because of guilt, because of impatience with pretense now that we were alone. Nino was careless. The words hollowed something in me. Why? Because Luca mistakes softness for strength. Renato turned his wedding ring once around his finger. His father built an empire. Luca inherited a conscience. I felt suddenly cold everywhere. He did not gloat. That would have been easier to hate. He spoke like a man discussing a flawed business plan. The warehouse where he took me was in Jersey, on the edge of the water, empty except for old crates and a second-floor office with one barred window. They tied my wrists. Not well enough, I noticed. Men who underestimate women rarely tie knots twice. Renato stood in the doorway while one of his men searched my pockets. "Where's the ledger copy?" he asked. I laughed once. "You think I'd keep it on me? I think Luca may have made you sentimental enough to carry insurance." When I said nothing, he came closer. "She told him not to leave me there." The words came out before I meant to say them. Renato paused. "Bianca," I said, "in the photograph." She told him not to leave her. For the first time, his expression shifted into something like respect. "You see too much," he said. My heart thudded once, hard enough to hurt. It was him. Not a rival family, not a faceless enemy. The man who had patted my shoulder, brought me espresso, spoken of my father with compassion. The man inside the house. "You betrayed the safe house." He did not answer directly. Men like Renato never handed over full confessions when implication would do. "That girl died, the girl died," Renato said, because Luca's father mistook sentiment for strategy. The words landed so coldly that for a moment I forgot to breathe. He stood in front of me with his cuffs immaculate, his voice calm, his expression arranged into something almost paternal. That was the obscenity of men like him. They did not need to snarl to be monstrous. They only needed to measure human life like inventory. I sat tied to a chair in the second-floor office while gray water slapped pilings outside the warehouse and late light bled weakly through the barred window. "You betrayed her," I said. Renato tilted his head. "I prevented weakness from becoming succession," he corrected. My stomach turned. "She was a child. She was leverage, then a liability." He sighed, almost weary with memory. "Your problem, Clara, is the same as Luca's. You keep believing love makes people better. Mostly, it makes them stupid." I looked at him and saw every kind word he had ever used on me rot in retrospect. "My father knew," I said quietly, not a question. Renato's gaze sharpened with approval that made me want to claw his face open. "Your father suspected enough to become inconvenient," he said. "He found numbers he could not reconcile. Shipment codes. Redirected accounts. He thought decency protected men who minded their own ovens." A faint shrug. "It doesn't." The room narrowed around me. "So you buried him?" "No." "I spared him." Renato folded his hands. "Prison is cleaner than a pier." Rage came up so hard my wrists strained against the rope. "He went to jail for you. He went to jail because he would not learn the first law of survival." "Which is?" Renato smiled without warmth. "When fire starts in the wrong room, you lock the door and save the house." For one wild second, I saw Luca at 17, arriving too late to a burning church. Heard pounding at a window I had never stood beneath. Understood, with a sickness that reached bone deep, that Renato had spent years calling cowardice wisdom. I swallowed against the acid in my throat. "Why me?" I asked. Because Nino was sentimental too, because he forced your name into this before dying. Because Luca looked at you once and forgot to hide that he cared. Renato stepped closer. And because men who survive by becoming steel are easiest to break when they start wanting soft things. I laughed then. I could not help it. It came out ragged and ugly and completely wrong for the room. Renato frowned. What is funny? You think that makes you profound, I said. It just makes you old. His eyes went flat. Good. I wanted him angry. Anger made people careless. My wrists had been tied badly, just as I'd thought. Not loose enough to slip free, but rushed. One knot crossed over another instead of locking cleanly. Since he started talking, I had been working my right thumb against the strain, feeling skin burn, tendons ache. Now something gave, just a little. Enough. Renato noticed the movement of my shoulders. Don't bother. I'm Italian, I said. We bother professionally. A flicker, annoyance or reluctant amusement. Hard to tell. He nodded to the man by the door. Search her again. The guard came toward me, big hands, cheap aftershave, the kind of face that had never needed imagination. He checked my apron, my pockets, my boots. His fingers brushed the small paper packet I had shoved into my side seam hours ago out of habit before leaving La Knot. Baker's dusting flour, meant for sticky surfaces. He missed it. I kept my face empty. When he stepped back, Renato looked satisfied. There will be a call placed in 10 minutes, he said. Luca will come. He always comes when something wounds his pride. Not pride, I said before I could stop myself. Renato studied me a moment, then smiled. No, he agreed softly. Not pride. He moved to the window and looked out at the water. When Bianca was hidden in that church, Luca begged his father to move her. He said the location felt wrong. His father refused. Trusted the wrong men, trusted me. Renato turned his wedding ring once around his finger. I told myself I did what I had to, a girl for an empire. The arithmetic offended him. It never offended me. He said it like a confession delivered to a priest he expected to impress. I thought of Luca's face when he held the photograph in Orphe. Of how controlled he had become, which I now understood was what happened when grief was too old to bleed properly. You didn't save a house, I said. You burned down a little girl and called it leadership. For the first time, something vicious showed through Renato's civility. That is why he'll ruin himself for you, he said. You speak to wounds like they're doors. He nodded once at the guard. The man left. A second later, I heard metal scrape downstairs, a can dragged across concrete, then another. Gasoline. My blood iced over. Renato watched realization hit me and seemed almost kind again. He should see a window, he said softly, just once more. Then perhaps he'll remember what strength actually costs. You sick, the slap split the sentence. My face snapped sideways, copper flooded my mouth. Renato adjusted his cuff. I prefer precision, he said. Then he left the room. The door locked behind him. For 3 heartbeats I sat stunned. Then I moved. The rope cut deeper as I yanked hard against the loosened knot, twisting my wrist sideways until skin peeled hot and wet. I bit back a cry and pulled again. The chair legs screeched over concrete. Below me, somewhere in the warehouse, glass broke, then the unmistakable glug of liquid spreading. I ripped one hand free. Pain shot up to my elbow so hard I almost blacked out. No time. I tore the rest away, stumbled to the window, and looked down. The warehouse yard stretched empty toward the river, except for one black sedan near the loading doors and 2 men moving quickly with rifles. At the far edge of the lot, headlights cut around the corner too fast. One car, then another, then a third. My heart slammed once so hard it hurt. Luca. Gunfire erupted downstairs before the first car fully stopped. I lurched back from the window as the front entrance exploded inward in a burst of splintered wood and shouting. A second later, smoke began to push under the office door in dark strips. No, 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 no. I ran for the door, threw my shoulder against it, got nothing, locked from outside. I grabbed the metal chair and smashed it against the knob until the cheap wood around the latch cracked, but did not break. Heat climbed fast. Renato had planned this well. My hands shook as I ripped open the flour packet and dumped a line of white onto the floorboards leading from the window to the door, without knowing exactly why, except that Baker's marked surfaces by. Instinct and some part of me wanted proof I had stood here. Wanted a trail, wanted something of mine to answer the fire. Smoke thickened. I coughed hard enough to see stars. Then from below came 2 shots in rapid succession, a man screaming, and a voice that cut through every other sound in the building. "Clara!" I hit the barred window with both palms. "Luca!" For one impossible second, all I saw was smoke and yard and flame licking up from the lower wall. Then he looked up. Through the haze, through the firelight, I saw his face turn toward mine. And everything in him changed. He had reached one window too late in his life, not this one. Later, I would remember the fire in fragments, not as one event, as pieces, the roar under the floorboards. The iron taste of smoke, the barred window hot beneath my hands, and Luca below me, already moving before any sane man would have chosen how. He disappeared from my sight. A second later, gunfire thundered again from somewhere inside the warehouse, then footsteps on the stairs. Fast, relentless, nearer than fear. The office door burst inward with a crack of splitting wood. Luca came through smoke like something cut out of it. His shirt was half untucked, one sleeve blackened, blood at his temple that I could not tell was old or new. His eyes found me, and for a heartbeat he looked less dangerous than devastated. "Come here," I was already moving. He crossed the room in 3 strides, grabbed my face with both hands as if checking I was solid, and swore once in a language I did not know but understood perfectly. "The window," I coughed. He wanted, I know. He tore off his coat, wrapped it around my head and shoulders, then pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and tied it over my mouth with rough efficiency. The tenderness of it nearly undid me more than the fire. "There are men downstairs," he said. "Stay on me, you're bleeding." He looked at me like I had said something small and lovable and deeply inconvenient. "Farina." The word was warning, prayer, and impatience all at once. Then the ceiling groaned. He didn't waste another second. One arm locked around my waist, and he drove us into the corridor as burning plaster fell where we had been standing. The stairwell was a tunnel of smoke and flying sparks. Halfway down, a man came through the dark with a gun raised. Luca shot him without breaking stride. I flinched. He tightened his hold. "Eyes on me," I obeyed. We hit the first floor in a wave of heat so intense I thought my skin might split. Flames had crawled along spilled gasoline toward the loading bay. Through them, at the far doors, I saw Moss hauling one limping man out by the collar while shouting something furious and operatic about cholesterol. Another shot cracked from the shadows. Luca turned with me still pinned to his side. Too slow, I saw the muzzle flash before he did. "Down!" I shoved at him with everything I had. The bullet tore across his shoulder instead of center mass. He made a sound I never wanted to hear again. Then Renato stepped from behind a stack of old crates, silver hair ash-dusted now, face finally stripped of its gentility. "So predictable," he said. Luca put himself in front of me despite the blood darkening fast across his shirt. Renato's gun tracked up toward my face. "Move," Luca said softly. I had heard him quiet before. I had never heard him like that. Renato smiled. "You see, this is why your father should have left leadership to men who understood subtraction." The next second snapped like wire. Luca fired once. Renato jerked sideways, the bullet catching high near the ribs. Not dead, not enough. He staggered back toward the loading doors, disappearing behind flame and smoke as more shouting erupted outside. Maso crashed through the haze like an infuriated saint. "If you two die before I eat cheese again," he barked, "I become a haunting." He saw Luca's shoulder and swore so inventively I almost admired it. The last clear memory I had inside the warehouse was Luca's hand cupping the back of my head, as we stumbled into night air and cold river wind. Then all the held-together parts of me started to come apart. Outside was noise, sirens, men running, the warehouse coughing black smoke into the sky. Someone tried to guide me toward an ambulance, and Luca physically removed their hand from my arm without looking away from me. "I'm fine," I said, and immediately bent over coughing. "You're terrible at lying," Maso informed me, pressing a bottle of water into my hand. "It's one of your least elegant traits." He was limping badly. One side of his jacket was torn. He still somehow looked offended rather than injured. A paramedic came toward us, young and broad-shouldered, and far too handsome for the amount of soot on my face. "Ma'am, I need to check your pupils." I blinked at him. Maso muttered, "Of course he's handsome." God is a sadist. The paramedic shone a light in my eyes, asked me my name, asked if I knew what day it was, then smiled in that automatic, reassuring way medical professionals probably practiced. "You're doing okay," he said. "Lucky." Something in me, frayed and delirious with adrenaline, gave him a tired half-smile back. That was when Luca, sitting on the ambulance step while another medic bandaged his shoulder, lifted his head. His gaze moved from my face to the paramedics, then back to me. When the medic stepped away for gauze, Luca crooked 2 fingers once. I should not have gone to him immediately. I did. He caught my wrist the second I was close enough and pulled me between his knees so suddenly I had to brace a hand on the ambulance wall not to fall. His good hand slid to the back of my neck. "Smile at another man again and see what happens," he murmured against my ear. Heat flashed through me so sharply it almost felt like pain. I turned my head. "Is that a threat?" His mouth brushed my temple, barely there. "It's jealousy," he said, "which is uglier." Then he looked at me in a way that emptied the whole lot of everyone else. Smoke moved behind him. Red lights spun over wet pavement. Somewhere Masa was arguing with a medic that emotional distress counted as a cardiac event. None of it touched the space between us. "You came," I whispered. The words were stupid. Of course he came. That was the entire ruin of him. Still, something passed over his face at hearing it said aloud. "I was late once," he said. The wound in those 5 words nearly broke me. "You weren't late tonight." He searched my face as if the sentence might contain mercy. Then he kissed me, not gently, not carelessly either. Like a man who had spent too long turning tenderness into discipline and finally ran out of strength to keep doing it. I tasted smoke, blood, rain, and something so fiercely restrained it made my knees weak. My fingers closed in his shirt without permission. His hand came to my jaw. The world tilted once and then righted itself around the fact of his mouth on mine. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. Maso's voice floated over the sirens. "I am surrounded by people with no respect for emergency scenes." Neither of us laughed. We were breathing too hard for it. A man approached fast from the line of Luca's cars, one of his captains. Hard face, harder eyes. "Boss, Renato's gone, left blood in the alley and a car at the pier. We found one of his men alive." Luca's expression changed, not away from me, through me and back into war. "What did he say?" "That Visconti wanted the girl alive because she has the last page." I frowned. "What last page?" Luca looked at me. Then at the inside pocket of my coat, where the lining had been repaired last week by one of the seamstresses upstairs at La Knot because I'd torn it catching a tray. Very carefully, he reached in and withdrew a folded, smoke-warmed piece of paper I had never seen before. Renato had searched my pockets, not my hem. Maso let out a low whistle. "Well, good news, Clara. You're still interesting." I stared at the hidden page while river smoke curled into the black sky. The fire had not ended anything. It had only burned away the lies too thin to survive it. The page hidden in my coat had been stitched into the lining with a baker's thread so fine it looked accidental. It was. We spread it open on the stainless steel pastry table at La Knot just before dawn while the kitchen slept around us in exhausted silence. I knew the handwriting immediately. My father's. The sight of it hit me so hard I had to grip the counter. Not neat script, not sentimental, his quick work hand. The one that wrote numbers, while bread-proofed and invoices piled up, and life kept demanding precision no matter how tired he was. Luca stood on my right, jacket off, shoulder newly bandaged beneath his shirt. Maso stood on my left holding a paper cup of miserable green juice and glaring at it as if betrayal now came in vegetable form. "You can cry, you know," Maso said without looking at me. "I know, just checking. Everyone in this building has the emotional habits of floor tile." Luca ignored him. I could feel how hard he was ignoring him. The page was not a ledger exactly. It was part key, part warning, part map disguised as bakery inventory. Flour weights, yeast lots, delivery times, feast days. At first glance it meant nothing. Then my father's habits began returning to me in pieces. He never wrote direct names beside debts. He assigned saints to people he didn't trust. He marked hidden cash with oven temperatures. And when he thought he was being watched, he buried locations in recipe failures. My finger moved down the list. "Here," I said. Luca leaned closer. I felt the warmth of him before I let myself notice the scent, soap, smoke, and the faint metallic edge of healing blood. "This isn't flour," I said, tapping one line. "White, 40 sacks St. Lucie late rise. That's not product, it's a warning." "Meaning?" Luca asked. "St. Lucie Church Festival was in December." "Late rise means delayed pickup. White sacks," I swallowed once as the shape completed itself. "Not flour, ash," Maso grimaced. I preferred life when coded messages involved less church and more cannoli. I traced farther down. There, the storefront. The tiny place in Carroll Gardens, my place. The one I had almost taken before my life was rearranged by blood and brass and Luca's eyes in my kitchen. Next to it my father had written, "Old proofing oven. False back. Debt belongs to living daughter, not dead men." My vision blurred. Luca's hand came to the counter beside mine, not touching, near enough to choose. "He left it for you," he said. "He left me homework," I muttered thickly. Maso looked heavenward. "Excellent, she jokes when traumatized too. Soulmates, may I go eat salt now?" "No," Luca said. "Monster." By noon, we were inside the Carroll Gardens storefront. Dust filmed the windows. The old proofing oven hunched in the back like a relic too stubborn to die. Rosa stood near the counter, wringing her hands in her coat sleeves, furious and frightened in equal measure that I had not told her enough, and that she understood far too much anyway. "I should smack both of you," she said to me and Luca with democratic disgust. "One for secrecy, one for being exactly the kind of man your mother warned us about." Luca took that with more grace than most politicians. "Yes, Signora." Rosa narrowed her eyes. "Don't Signora me with that face." Maso, examining the pantry shelves, muttered, "I love her." The oven false back took 7 minutes to find and 30 seconds to pry loose. Inside were 3 things: a cash box, a rosary burned black at one end, and a second ledger, not copied, original Renato's payments. The real ones, years of them, payoffs to rivals, police, union stewards, shipping brokers, and halfway through, the line that made the room go still. "Sent Agnes safe house transfer, approved by RV." Below it in my father's hand, smaller and darker with pressure, "Bianca there. God forgive me for knowing." Luca stopped breathing, not literally. Worse. He went so still the whole room seemed to harden around him. I looked up and saw 17 again in the coat check room. The photo, the old pane drawn close enough to cut. "Luca," I said. He took the ledger from me with extraordinary care. The page shook once in his hand, only once. "He knew," Luca said, not to me. Maso's expression lost all humor. "Boss, my father knew," Luca said again, "or suspected enough to leave this buried instead of burning it." The loneliness in him then was so naked it made the room ache, not dramatic grief. Not a scene, just the terrible shape of a man discovering betrayal had traveled through blood and silence both. I stepped in front of him before thought could stop me. "This is not yours alone." His gaze dropped to mine, dark, distant, dangerous in all the ways people meant and one they never did. "It is." "No," I shook my head. "That's your favorite lie. That carrying everything alone makes you stronger. It doesn't, it just makes you unreachable." Rosa inhaled sharply. Maso looked between us like he had front row seats to a gunfight conducted through emotional literacy. Luca's jaw locked. I kept going because someone had to. "You build locked rooms and call them leadership. You bleed in them and call it duty. You think if nobody can touch the wound, then nobody can use it against you." My throat tightened. "That isn't strength, it's loneliness with good tailoring." Silence hit the room hard. He stared at me as if I had laid a knife on the table between us and named it honestly. Then he looked away first. That was how I knew it had landed. One of his men came through the back door at speed. "Boss, we found the leak." Luca turned. The captain held up a cheap second phone in an evidence bag. "Daniela, front of house." Renato paid for her brother's rehab and had her sending departure times whenever Clara left with security. A strange grief went through me at hearing it, not shock. Just the sour confirmation that kindness could be rented. She admit it? Maso asked. She's in tears, the captain said. Says she thought they'd only scare the girl. Didn't know about the hits. Luca's face gave nothing away. Keep her alive. She talks to me later. The captain nodded and left. War gathered itself again immediately. Renato knew we had the ledger now. He would come for it or run. Luca closed the book. We finish this tonight. Rosa crossed herself. And the girl, I decide for myself now, I said before Luca could answer. His gaze flicked to me, dangerous, disbelieving, interested. No, he said. Yes, I said. Maso groaned. Ah, excellent. I'm in a romance and a hostage negotiation at the same time. I stepped closer to Luca until there was no polite distance left between us. He wants the ledger and me, I said quietly. So use that. His expression turned cold enough to frost glass. I am not putting you in front of his gun. You already did. Every day you kept me in your war without letting me choose how to stand in it. That hit too. Good. His hand came to my waist with sudden force, not bruising, only final. That choice ends if it buries you. My pulse skipped anyway. I tipped my chin up. Then don't let it. For a long moment he said nothing. Then very softly, you ask for impossible things, Farina? I thought of windows, of fire, of the way he had looked up and reached anyway. No, I said. I ask them of the right man. We used my bakery to end a war. It would have horrified my mother, probably pleased my father. By 10, that night the little storefront in Carroll Gardens was dark, except for the back prep room, where a single hanging bulb lit the old oven and the scarred wooden work table that would have been mine in another life. Flour dust still clung to the corners from decades no scrubbing could erase. The place smelled faintly of yeast, rust, and memory. Luca wanted me 3 blocks away with body armor and 6 men. I compromised by agreeing to 5. He called that losing. Maso called it astonishing emotional growth under pressure, then ate contraband parmesan from his coat pocket when he thought nobody was looking. Renato came just after 11. Not through the front, through the alley, the way men entered kitchens when they intended damage. I heard the back latch move and every part of me sharpened. I stood at the prep table in my apron, the ledger in front of me, my palms dusted with flour because they always were when I needed steadiness. That scent, dry, clean, ordinary, rose around me and grounded everything that fear tried to blur. Renato stepped inside with 1 gun and 2 men. He looked tired now, older. Blood loss had thinned the civility in his face down to something hungrier. Clara, he said. I hoped you inherited more prudence from your father. I got his bookkeeping instead. His gaze fell to the ledger. Give it to me. Or what? I asked. You burn another room? The muscle in his jaw twitched. Behind the walls and above the ceiling, Luca's men waited. Luca himself was somewhere I could not see and felt anyway, like weather before a storm. The plan had been simple. Stall Renato until his full confession was recorded, then close the net. Plans are always cleaner before people start bleeding inside them. Renato came closer. I was willing to be kind to you, he said. You should have accepted it. I almost smiled. There was poison in it. There is poison in everything that lasts. I shook my head. No, just in men who mistake fear for respect. His eyes flattened. He lifted the gun. Your father wrote things down because he wanted absolution, he said. He should have wanted survival. He knew Bianca was in that church. He knew the transfer line referred to a child. And still he stayed quiet. The words struck deep, but not where he hoped. Because he was afraid of you, I said. No. Because he understood hierarchy. You keep calling cowardice by noble names. Renato's mouth hardened. He could have warned them, he said. He did not. Luca's father could have moved the girl. He did not. We are all guilty by the time the fire starts, Clara. Some of us are simply honest about it. A voice answered from the dark doorway behind him. No, Luca said. Some of us light the match. Everything changed at once. Renato spun. Luca stepped out of shadow in a black coat and an expression I hoped never to stand opposite. Men moved behind him, cutting off the alley, the front, every route except surrender. Maso appeared in the hall with a pistol in one hand and a wedge of wrapped cheese in the other. If anyone asks, he said, deeply offended, this is medicinal. Even Renato stared. Luca never looked away from him. "You killed a child," Luca said. "Then spent years pretending it was arithmetic." Renato's lip curled. "And you spent years pretending grief made you principled instead of weak." For one awful second, I saw exactly how the older man had survived so long. He knew which wounds to touch and how hard. Then Renato's left hand moved, not toward Luca. Toward me. He lunged, catching my arm and wrenching me against him so fast the gun jammed hard under my ribs. The ledger skidded off the table. Flour burst into the air in a pale cloud. Men shouted. Luca went still. "Drop it," Renato snapped, "or I open her up and leave through your kitchen." My heart hammered once, then settled strangely. Not because I wasn't afraid, because I was done letting men decide what fear made me. My flour-covered hand slid across the worktable until it found the brass scoop beside the sugar bin. Renato dragged me backward toward the oven door. "Tell them," he said to Luca, "to move." Luca's face had gone remote in that terrifying way of his, every emotion stripped back to purpose. But I knew him better now, knew the fracture hidden under the control, knew he was one breath from turning the room into massacre. "Luca," I said, as steadily as I could. His eyes hit mine. It was enough. I slammed the brass scoop backward into Renato's wrist. The gun fired wild into the ceiling. At the same moment, I threw my other hand up into his face, flour exploding between us in a white blind burst. He cursed, reeling. Luca crossed the distance faster than thought. Renato got one more shot off. Then Luca hit him, not like a gentleman, not like a boss. Like a brother who had heard pounding behind glass for years and finally found the man on the right side of the fire. They crashed into the old oven hard enough to rattle the iron doors. Renato clawed for the fallen gun. Luca caught his collar, drove him back, and hit him again. Once, twice. Then stopped just long enough to snatch Renato's own wedding ring hand and slam it flat on the table. "This hand signed the transfer," Luca said. Renato spat blood and smiled through it. "Your father still trusted me more than he trusted you." Luca's face went blank. "That frightened me more than rage would have." Maso stepped forward. "Boss," Luca never looked at him. Renato laughed once, wet and ugly. "Bianca screamed for you, you know?" The room broke. Luca's gun was in his hand so fast I did not see him draw. The shot sounded small in the bakery. Renato folded. Just like that, one breathful of poison. The next gone, silence hit after, dense as floodwater. No one moved. Flour drifted lazily through the hanging light, settling on blood, wood, Luca's dark hair, my apron, the dead man on my floor. My floor. I looked at Renato's body and felt no triumph. Only the clean end of something rotten. Luca stood over him breathing hard, shoulders rigid, gun still down at his side. Then he turned to me, and all the violence left his face at once. "Are you hurt?" The question nearly undid me because it was so him. Not did I do the right thing, not is he dead, just that. I shook my head. He crossed to me slowly, like approaching a miracle he didn't trust not to vanish. His hands came up, stopped just off my face because even now part of him waited for permission. I gave it by leaning in first. His palms settled at my jaw. "You're bleeding," I whispered. "So are you?" "It's mostly flour." Something like broken laughter left him. Maso turned away on principle. "Disgusting, I hate happiness. Also, I definitely need a sandwich." That did make me laugh. Luca looked stunned by the sound, as if joy after this much ruin still surprised him. Then he lowered his forehead to mine. "I have nothing clean to offer you," he said quietly. "Not my name, not my world, not what loving me costs." I thought of the first morning in the kitchen. Blood on his hands, towel in mine, the floor he did not own. So I reached past him, pulled a clean side towel from the hook by the oven and pressed it into his hand. His mouth changed. Not a smile exactly, something rarer. "Don't ruin my floor," I said. His eyes closed once. When they opened, the darkness in them looked less lonely. "Farina," he murmured. This time the name did not sound like possession. It sounded like home. By morning, the police would have a ledger. The captains would have a story. Rosa would have opinions. Masa would absolutely steal something salted in celebration and claim religious exemption. War would not vanish because one bad man died in a bakery, but something worse had ended. The locked room inside Luca had opened. And standing in flower dust and blood and dawn just beginning at the window, I understood at last that strength was never the same thing as being alone. Sometimes it was this: a man lowering his weapon, a woman staying, a future built not from innocence but from what survived the fire.